You're listening to the story of a woman left to freeze in silence, her two daughters tied beside her like forgotten memories in the snow. No one saw them, no one cared, until a silent rancher rode past, dismounted, and chose not with words, but with action to carry them home. This is the story of survival, quiet strength, and a second chance at life. This is, Widow and her two daughters were left to die in a snowstorm. A silent rancher chose to carry them home as snow had a cruel way of covering everything: sins, secrets, even bodies. It came down quiet that morning, so soft it almost seemed kind, but Elias Crowder knew better. Snow didn't forgive, it erased, and the silence it brought wasn't peace, it was a warning. He hadn't planned to ride out so far that day. A corner post on his southern fence had cracked in the night wind, and repairs wouldn't wait for spring thaw. So, he wrapped himself in an old wool coat, saddled his horse, and set out into the cold. The wind bit through him, stinging his cheeks. His boots creaked in the stirrups, and the pines above moaned under the weight of ice. Nothing moved. No rabbit, no crow. Just him and the quiet breath of winter. Then, just past the ridge, he saw something that didn't belong. At first, it looked like fabric caught on the wire, a shawl maybe, snagged and twisted in the wind. But as he neared, he saw movement. Just a twitch, a tremble. Then came the shape of a woman, tied at the waist to a fence post like a scarecrow. Her long black hair hung frozen across her face. The small forms clung to her skirt, almost lost in its folds. His breath caught. He didn't call out, didn't waste time with words. Elias dismounted slowly, his boots crunching the snow beneath him. Step by step, he approached as if she might vanish if startled. The woman was barefoot. Rope bit into her wrists, chafed and raw. Her head drooped forward. She was barely conscious, her lips blue, lashes crusted with frost. One of the children gave a weak cough, proof of life. Barely. He moved faster then. The knife came from his belt, and he sliced through the ropes with practiced ease. The woman collapsed into his arms, heavy like a sack soaked through with snow and sorrow. He knelt, wrapped all three of them in his coat, and began the task of getting them home. He carried the youngest girl in his arm, her tiny face pressed against his chest. The older girl, quiet and dazed, clung to his shoulder. The woman, still breathing, ribs barely rising, was draped over the saddle. They were too cold to cry, too weak to question. And Elias, he didn't speak. Not yet. But his silence was its own kind of promise. The trail home was longer than he remembered. Snow pulled at his boots and numbed his fingers. He focused only on the steady movement of the horse and the weight in his arms. Just past the outer trail into town, a few townsfolk spotted him from their windows. Mina Ellis at the Mercantile pressed her face to the glass, mouth falling open as she took in the scene. Elias Crowder, the solitary rancher, cradling two children, with a woman slumped across his horse like a ghost. She crossed herself, then shut the curtain. Elias didn't look back. The cabin stood in the pines, small and weather-beaten, wrapped in smoke from a dying fire. It wasn't much for walls and a tin-patched roof, but it was dry. And it was warm. He nudged the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. The cold followed him in. The hearth was almost out, but a few embers still glowed. He moved quickly. The older girl he laid gently on a nest of quilts. The younger he peeled from his chest and wrapped in a dry blanket. Her skin was red, swollen from cold. He rubbed her fingers between his own until they twitched. Then he turned to the woman. He laid her on the cot in the far corner, the one that still held his late wife's shawl on the bedpost. He tried not to think of that. Her body was bruised. One shoulder bore a deep bite mark. Her collarbone jutted out sharply. Scrapes on her cheek told him she'd been dragged. Beaten. Maybe. Left to die. He wet a cloth and pressed it to her lips. She didn't drink, but she didn't turn away. Outside, the wind howled again like it was angry she'd survived. Elias stayed up through the night. He stripped off his wet coat, covered the girls with it, and tossed fresh wood into the fire. He found socks from a drawer and slipped them onto the girls' feet. One by one, quiet acts, the kind that don't earn thanks, but still matter. The woman didn't wake that night, not the next day either. Elias cleaned her wounds, rubbed salve on the raw skin of her wrists, and spooned broth between her lips when she stirred. The girls clung to each other, eyes wide and unblinking. They didn't speak, but they followed him with their gaze, watching as he moved around the room, tending to the fire, fetching water, fixing what he could. It was the third morning when the woman finally opened her eyes. The fire had burned low. Elias sat near the window, carving a piece of wood with his pocket knife. She tried to sit up but failed. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice a breath. He didn't answer, just nodded toward the fire. She turned her head. Her daughters lay curled together, still asleep, breathing soft. "You brought us here." Another nod. Her lips trembled. "Why?" Elias didn't look up from his carving. After a long silence, she whispered, "They left us. Tied to that fence." Her voice cracked. "My husband's brother said if I wouldn't be his, I could freeze." Elias paused, but still said nothing. She looked around the room at the cracked tin plates, the Bible on the shelf, the boots lined neatly by the hearth. A home once shared, a home now quiet. "You had a wife," she said softly. His hand stilled. "I won't stay long," she added. "Just until the girls are strong." Elias didn't answer, but something in his silence wrapped around her, not cold like the snow but warm, solid. She leaned her head back against the pillow, and for the first time in days, she closed her eyes without fear. When Willa next woke, the room was brighter. Outside the window, the storm had passed, leaving behind a sky that looked bruised and heavy. Inside, the warmth of the fire clung to the air like a blanket. The girls still slept, their little bodies curled close on the buffalo hide like kittens drawn to warmth. Willa's body ached not from the cold anymore, but from the return of feeling. Her shoulder throbbed, her spine screamed. But it was the rawness in her wrists that made her breath catch. Rope burns, deep and angry, a reminder. Elias sat in a chair near the door, his arms crossed, boots still muddy. He hadn't slept, or if he had, he'd done it sitting up. She watched him, silent. The man hadn't spoken a word since rescuing them. Not one. She reached for the blanket around her. "I don't know why you did it," she said quietly, "but thank you." He gave a slight nod. That was all. By noon, Willa could sit up without help. Her legs trembled, but she forced them beneath her. She found the wash basin near the hearth, dipped a cloth in warm water, and cleaned the girls' faces. June stirred. First, then Ivy. They didn't speak. Not yet. Willa whispered gentle things to them as she worked. "You're safe now. Mama's here. Everything's okay." She didn't know if it was true, but sometimes saying something made it real. That evening, Elias brought in a sack of flour and dried beans. He set it on the table without a word. On top, a single lemon. Willa stared at it like it was made of gold. "You didn't have to," she whispered. Still nothing. "I can work," she added, voice firmer. "I don't want charity." He looked up then, briefly. His eyes were quiet, not empty, but weighed down. Finally, he said, "You stand too proud for someone asking that question." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what that meant exactly, but it didn't feel cruel. The next morning, Willa stepped outside for the first time. The snow was thick, but the air had softened. Ivy followed her, clinging to her mother's skirt, while June stayed inside, peeking through the doorway. Willa hauled water from the well, her hands raw and red by the time the bucket was full. At the trough, a group of women stood talking. Their voices dropped as she approached. "That's her," one said, "the one Elias brought back. She was tied to a fence. They say no name. 2 children. Probably a drifter." Mina Ellis didn't bother to whisper. She knew what she was doing, finding herself a warm house and a man with no wife left to protest. Willa didn't cry. She just straightened her back, turned, and walked away. Ivy never let go of her hand. Later that evening, Elias came in from the barn. Willa was kneeling by the hearth, brushing June's hair. The firelight danced across the cabin walls. The girls had eaten their first full meal, beans and bread, and their cheeks held color again. "I don't plan to stay," she said softly as Elias removed his coat. "Just until I can stand without wobbling." He gave the smallest of nods. "I know people are talking. I heard them." He didn't respond. Willa looked down at her girls. "They think I came here for what I could take," she said. "But the truth is I had nothing left." That silence came again, the kind that wasn't cold, but thick and honest. She remembered the moment Elias found them in the snow. She had barely whispered the words, "Don't leave us." She had meant them, and he hadn't. A few days later, Elias returned from town with more supplies: flour, coffee, nails. At the blacksmith shop, someone muttered, "Fool thing you're doing. That woman and her kids, they're just looking for a name to claim." Elias didn't flinch. He paid for his goods and walked away. Back at the cabin, Willa was teaching the girls to warm their feet by dipping cloths in hot water and rubbing them dry. It was such a simple, motherly thing, ordinary in every way, but when Elias stepped through the door and saw it, something about it caught in his throat. He watched quietly. Then he set the sack on the table and went to chop firewood. That night, Willa stood in the kitchen corner, wringing her hands. The girls were asleep. Elias sat near the hearth, polishing a lantern. "I haven't said thank you," she began. He looked up. "I don't know what you expect, but I can earn my place. I know how to mend shirts. I can cook, patch boots. I won't stay where I'm not wanted, but please don't send us back." Elias rose, crossed the room slowly, and handed her a cup of broth. He said only one thing, "You're safe now." Willa gripped the mug tightly, her hands shaking. I didn't think I'd hear those words again. That night, Willa dreamt of rope and ice and voices that didn't care if she lived or died. She woke with a gasp, clutching the blanket around her girls. But there was no wind screaming through cracks, no pain in her wrists, only the steady warmth of firelight and Elias's soft footsteps nearby as he stirred the coals. She watched him as he worked, quiet, patient, present. He didn't save her with speeches. He didn't promise her the world. But every silent act, every meal, every piece of dry wood, every nod felt like something sacred. The snow outside was still deep, the wind still cold. But for the first time in a long time, Willa felt like she might survive it. Spring hadn't yet touched the land, but something warmer had begun to settle inside the cabin. Willa could feel it in the way June laughed again, quietly, hesitantly, or how Ivy hummed under her breath as she stirred beans at the hearth. Each day was stitched together with small acts of healing. Elias built a little bench just high enough for children's legs. When Willa asked if he'd made it, he only shrugged, then went back to chopping wood. He never asked for thanks, never looked for reward, and Willa, she never forgot the cold. Not because it still chilled her bones, but because she now knew what warmth felt like. Then, one day, it all came crashing back. Willa was hanging damp clothes on the line, Ivy playing at her feet, when she heard the low thunder of hooves. 3 riders appeared at the ridge. At the front rode a man she'd never wanted to see again. Malvin. His coat was dark with dust, his grin smug and cruel. The other 2 riders, young men with uncertain eyes, hung back. They didn't look at her. They looked anywhere but. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle leaning against the wall. He said nothing. Malvin pulled up close, eyes sweeping over Willa like she was property on a ledger. "You've gotten real cozy here," he sneered. "Didn't take you long." Willa didn't move. Ivy clung to her skirts. "I came to take back what's mine," Malvin said. "And don't pretend otherwise. You and those girls belong to me now. You left us to die," Willa said. Her voice didn't shake. He chuckled. "I taught you a lesson." "That's not the same." Elias didn't speak, but he stepped forward, just enough to cast a shadow over the porch. Malvin's eyes narrowed. "You gonna hide behind a man now? What did he promise you?" "A last name." "She promised herself life," Elias said, calm as a lake before a storm. Malvin spat in the dirt. I ain't here to ask. I'm here to take. And with that, he dismounted. The world slowed. Malvin lunged not at Elias, but at Willa. Maybe he thought she'd flinch. Maybe he expected her to run, but Willa stood her ground. Elias was faster. He moved with the power of someone who had built silence into strength. He struck Malvin square in the jaw, sending him spinning into the snow. The two men grappled, fists flying, boots slipping in the mud. The younger riders watched, but didn't move. Willa shielded the girls with her body. Malvin pulled a knife. Elias grabbed his wrist, slammed it against a fence post. The blade fell with a dull thud. The fight ended as quickly as it began. Malvin lay panting in the dirt, lips split, pride shattered. From the road, the sheriff rode in. Sheriff Brandt wasn't a man of many words either, but he understood things just by looking. Want to press charges? He asked Willa, nodding toward the bruised heap in the snow. She looked at Malvin, then at her daughters behind her. No, she said. Let him ride out. Let him be seen this way. The sheriff gave a small smile. Fair enough. He turned to the silent riders. Either of you want to stay behind and make more trouble? He asked. They turned their horses without a word. Malvin was dragged away, broken but breathing, and for the first time since she'd met him, Willa felt nothing for him. Not fear, not hate. Nothing. That night, the silence in the cabin was different, not tense, not heavy. Willa sat by the fire, brushing June's hair. Ivy lay on the little bench Elias had built, humming to herself. You didn't have to protect me, Willa whispered to Elias. He looked at her. I steady. I didn't do it because I had to, he said. I did it because no one else would. She nodded. The fire crackled. And if he comes back? Elias stood, crossed the floor, and placed a hand gently beneath her chin. It wasn't a caress. It was an anchor. Then he meets me first, he said. Willa didn't respond with words. She just leaned into his hand, letting the weight of the day settle into her bones. The next few days passed like the breaking of a fever. Willa scrubbed the floors, not because she was expected to, but because it made the cabin feel more hers. She baked flatbread. The girls giggled at the flour on their noses. Elias didn't say much, but he ate every bite. At the well, Mina Ella saw her again. Didn't think he was one for charity, she said loudly, pouring water into her pail. Funny how a girl like you finds herself in a man's house with no name and two mouths to feed. Willa didn't flinch this time. She met Mina's gaze. It's not charity when you work for it, she said. And it's not a plan when you've already been left to die. Then she turned and walked away, back straight, chin high, back at the ranch. Ivy sat under a pine tree, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Willa sat beside her, the smell of warm bread still clinging to her sleeves. Sometimes, Willa whispered, I forget how scared I used to be. Elias walked past, carrying firewood. He didn't respond. But Willa didn't need him to, until I remember how safe I feel now, she added. He paused, then nodded. Just once. The wind would shift again, no doubt. Safety, Willa had learned, was not a guarantee. It was a choice people had to keep making. But now, for the first time in years, she had someone who made that choice with her. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something more than survival. It was the start of life. Morning broke with the sound of birds, just a few, but enough to hint at the coming of spring. The snow hadn't fully melted, but patches of earth peeked through like shy secrets. Inside the cabin, the girls played with a handful of carved wooden animals Elias had left on the table without explanation. Willa watched them, a soft smile on her lips. She was folding laundry when she noticed a new addition near the fire, a small bench, child-sized, hand-sanded, still smelling of pine. Did you build this? She asked Elias as he stepped in from the porch. He glanced at it, shrugged, seemed needed. Ivy and June scrambled onto it with delighted squeals. Willa chuckled, then fell silent. She ran her hand along the edge of the bench, feeling every notch and smooth groove. It wasn't much, but it was more care than anyone had given them in years. She looked at Elias and said quietly, "You didn't have to keep us." He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at her, he replied, "I didn't keep you. I chose to." Those 5 words filled the cabin with more warmth than the fire. They were finding rhythm, if not exactly peace, then at least something steady. Willa began making simple meals again: bean stew, flatbread, preserved peaches when they could afford it. The girls started helping to stirring pots, folding linens. June practiced counting pebbles, while Ivy copied her mother's movements with care. But with routine came awareness. Willa could feel the way eyes followed her in town. The whispers hadn't stopped. At the well, at the market, outside the church, always watching. Not everyone believed her story. Some didn't care too. Others, perhaps, envied what they imagined a woman rescued, a cabin warmed, a man's protection, but they didn't know what it cost to survive. They didn't know how cold it had been tied to that fence. One gray afternoon, a knock came at the door. Elias answered, rifle leaning beside him. It was Sheriff Brandt. "I don't like being made a fool," he said flatly. "Half the county saw what happened, and now Malvin's spreading rumors about being ambushed." Willa stepped into view, her hands clenched at her sides. "Let him talk," she said. "He tied me to a fence. He doesn't get to act like a victim now." The sheriff nodded slowly. "He's not pressing charges, but he's not done either. Men like that don't crawl away, they circle back." "I'm not running," Willa said. Elias looked at her, then turned to Brandt. "We're ready. If he does," Brandt tipped his hat. "Just hope the town sees it your way." Then he rode off, leaving only hoof prints and warning behind. That evening, Willa baked bread. The smell filled the small cabin, thick with comfort. Elias ate without speaking, but every bite he took was a kind of answer. After dinner, Ivy and June took turns brushing one another's hair near the fire. Willa wiped down the table, then stood by the window, watching the last light fade. Elias joined her, his shadow stretching beside hers across the floor. "They'll always talk," she said quietly. "They talked before," he replied. "Didn't stop me then." She looked at him, really looked. "I thought I was something broken," she whispered. He didn't look away. "You were." She didn't flinch. "But broken things get rebuilt," he added. "Stronger if they're held right." She reached for his hand. He let her take it. The next day brought another test. 3 riders, dust rising behind them like a warning. One led the way, his jaw set, cruel smile back in place. Malvin. He pulled up at the gate, dismounted like he owned the land. Behind him, the 2 other men looked less certain. One shifted in his saddle. The other turned slightly, not toward the house, but away from it. Elias stepped out onto the porch. Willa joined him. She didn't hide this time. She stood tall beside him, Ivy clinging to her skirt, June watching wide-eyed from the doorway. "She's not yours," Elias said. Malvin laughed. "Wasn't death. It was a lesson. She was supposed to come back sorry. She came back stronger," Elias said. "And I'm not asking you to leave. I'm not here to argue," Malvin growled. "You should be," Willa said, stepping forward. Her voice didn't shake. "You never knew what I was worth. You still don't." Her words cut deeper than Elias's fists ever could. Malvin's hand moved. Fast, but Elias moved faster. They clashed at the edge of the porch, boots skidding in dirt, fists hammering against ribs. The others didn't interfere. Even they knew Malvin had gone too far. He pulled a knife again, but Elias knocked it loose. This time, there was no sheriff. Willa didn't scream. She shielded her girls with her body, calm as iron. When Elias pinned Malvin in the snow, he didn't say a word. Willa did. "Let everyone see what happens to the man who thought fear made a woman his." Malvin spat blood, but he didn't argue. He left the ranch humiliated, his pride broken, his power snapped. That night, the air inside the cabin was still. Willa sat by the fire, brushing ash from her skirt. Elias poured water into the basin. The girls giggled softly in the loft, wrapped in blankets and dreams. "You're healing," Elias said. Willa blinked hard. "And if he comes again?" she asked. Elias turned to her fully. For the first time, he reached out, his fingers resting lightly under her chin, lifting it just enough to meet his eyes. Then he meets me first, he said, and you won't have to ask again. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat ached, with tears she wouldn't let fall. So, instead, she reached for the edge of his sleeve, not his hand, just something to hold on to. The days that followed were quieter, not because trouble had passed entirely, but because the house had settled into its own kind of peace. The kind that comes after a storm, when nothing is certain, but everything is somehow more real. The girls were the first to sense it. June started humming again, not just when she played, but even when she helped fold linens or stirred beans over the fire. Ivy began drawing small circles in the dirt outside, pretending they were seeds. Willa didn't ask what they meant, she just watched, heartful. Eyes guarded. Elias built a low stool for the girls to kneel on while praying at night. He didn't mention it, just left it by the hearth with the same silence he always used to show care. Willa found herself brushing her daughter's hair with more tenderness than usual. One morning, Ivy handed her a comb, the same one she hadn't spoken with since the day they were rescued. That single act, simple and small, made Willa's breath catch. She'd survived cruelty, silence, hunger, snow. Now she was surviving hope. But trauma doesn't vanish. It waits. It flickers behind every knock at the door, every hoofbeat in the distance. Even when Willa smiled, some part of her listened for the sound of chains, for a man's voice raised in command. She never told Elias how often she checked the back door, how tightly she braided Ivy's hair before sleep, how she always kept the girls' boots close just in case they had to run again. Elias seemed to understand without words. He came in from chopping wood one evening, his movements sharp, deliberate. He didn't ask if she was afraid. He simply said, "Then I won't fall." Willa nodded, understanding what he meant. "If trouble comes, I will stand." That trouble came, sooner than expected. 3 horses, 5 men, dust in the air. Malvin again. He didn't come alone this time, he brought a full threat. But there was a difference in how he carried himself now. The swagger had soured into something else, desperation. Maybe, or shame he didn't know how to name. Elias stood before the porch, rifle at his side, but not raised. Willa stepped behind the girls. Her hands rested on their shoulders, steadying herself as much as them. Malvin dismounted. "She's not yours," Elias said before Malvin could speak. "You lost that right the day you tied her to a fence." Malvin's smile twisted. "That wasn't death, that was a lesson." "She came back stronger," Willa said, stepping forward slowly, gently brushing Ivy's hand from her sleeve. "You never saw what I was worth," she said. "And you still don't." Malvin's hand twitched toward his belt, but the moment he moved, Elias closed the space between them like thunder on dry earth. There were no shouted threats, no wasted words, just a fist, a crack. The crunch of boots in snow turned mud. They tumbled, fists flying. Malvin reached for a knife again. Some men never learn, but Elias slammed his wrist into the frozen ground. This time, it stayed down. Sheriff Brant arrived, a few townsfolk behind him. "You want to press charges?" he asked Willa. She looked at Malvin, blooded, coughing. "Beaten not just by fists, but by failure?" "No," she said. "Let him go. But let them all see what happens when a man thinks fear makes a woman his." After that, the silence changed again. Not heavy, not afraid, just still. Later that evening, as the fire crackled and the girls chased each other in the loft, Elias sat at the table fixing a loose boot heel. Willa stood by the door, watching the sky turn from ash to pink. "I used to think I was broken," she said softly. He didn't look up. "You were." She turned, surprised. "But broken things," he said, glancing at her, "get rebuilt. Stronger, if they're held right." She walked toward him, not fast, not out of desperation, but choice. She reached for his hand. He let her. "Keep it." Spring came not with a burst, but with a soft drip from the roof. The bees woke in the bark. The snow melted into thirsty soil. Ivy and June dug their fingers into the earth, planting seeds with giggles and muddy hands. Willa baked bread. Again, this time humming. Elias fixed the porch rail where Malvin had fallen. He sanded a new corner on the cabin frame, then stood back and nodded, like a man admitting something to himself. Mina Ellis passed the property one afternoon. She paused at the gate, watching the family through the trees. Didn't think he was one for company, she said to no one. Willa didn't hear her. She was laughing, head thrown back, hair tangled in the breeze. Her daughters chasing each other with sticks. Sometimes, Willa thought, life doesn't come back all at once. It trickles in. It plants itself. And if you tend it, it grows. That night, after the girls were asleep, Willa sat by the fire. Elias carved something small. A bird? Maybe. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then, no, she nodded. I don't either. The fire popped, a spark catching on the stone. Outside, the snow was gone. Inside, the past had softened, and between them, held by silence, by survival, by choice, a new season had begun.